welcome to the new series of Planted Unearthed. My name's Sam Peters and I'm one of the co-founders of Planted, the first contemporary design show aimed at reconnecting spaces with nature. Following the success of the first series, we're continuing to explore how design, sustainability, architecture, food production and nature can combine to create cleaner, greener, healthier spaces. For Series 2, we want to look deeper into the issues surrounding access to nature, while trying to understand how we can build a society where caring for the environment, consuming responsibly, and living sustainably all come naturally. We'll continue to showcase beautiful products today which improve tomorrow, while also trying to find answers to some of the toughest environmental questions which confront us all. As we launch our new series, we speak to an illustrator, author, and environmental activist whose recently published book entitled The Book of Trespass challenges our understanding of land ownership in the UK, while exploring how race, gender, and institutionalised inequality all play their part in restricting access to some of the UK's most beautiful landscapes. On January the 25th, the UK's Parliament will debate a bill which proposes to make the act of trespass a criminal offence. And Nick, along with fellow campaigner Guy Shrubsole, is central to a growing movement which last November saw more than 100 artists and actors write to the government, pleading with them to enable greater access to our countryside and green spaces. To discuss his campaign, book, artwork, and no doubt much more, it's my absolute pleasure to welcome Nick Hayes onto Planted Unearthed today. Nick, welcome to Planted Unearthed.
Thanks very much for having me. How are you doing?
Good, thanks, Nick. Very well indeed, and it really is a pleasure to have you on. I am now about 270 pages into your excellent and informative book, and why don't we start with perhaps the campaign and lead on to the book in a bit. But criminalising trespass, I mean, why is that a problem? That to a lot of people would seem like common sense. Why should people be able to walk onto other people's land?
Well, just to note, essentially our campaign, which was launched when the book was, it can be found at righttoroam.org.uk, was nothing to do with the criminalisation of trespass. We're simply looking to extend the Countryside and Rights of Way Act so that it can extend to where people can actually use it. Currently, the land that we're allowed access to is about 8% of English land. The public have the right to roam on. But by and large, these places are in the Peak District. They're a long way away. They're moorland, upland. We're asking for it to be extended to areas where the majority of the English public can actually access them. So greenbelt, rivers, woodland, and the remaining downland. Problem is, the Conservatives, as they've been they've been trying to do this since about 2010, where 30 odd of them wrote a letter demanding that we should up the charge of trespass from civil to criminal, thereby making people, liable for prison for overstepping the line. It's come back again. And so while we're trying to advance the public's connection with nature, we've now also got to fight this fire and make sure that the public's connection with nature, as scant as it is currently, is not further regressed by this legislation. So basically, when we launched our petition to, this was in about March during the first lockdown, when it seemed that this was really going to go ahead, we launched a petition to, all we can really do is ask for it to be debated in Parliament. And if you pass 100,000 signatures, then it triggers a debate in Parliament. And at that time, in the Conservative manifesto, it wasn't really clear what kind of trespass they were talking about. It was intentional trespass that they were looking to criminalize. Now, as a result of the campaign and the amount of signatures that we've got, they've kind of refined the wording to intentional trespass with intent to reside.
Right.
So we were worried initially whether it would be all of a sudden, wild swimmers, boarders, kayakers, ramblers, else to lay their caravans or to reside for the night. Largely, if you look at the systemic issue here, people are so keen to say, well, travelers this and travelers that kind of thing. But because of 10 years of austerity, councils have been forced to shut countless, sort of legally given traveler sites where travelers can stay. With so many of these being shut over the past decade, there really is very little space that travelers can stay. And now all of a sudden they're being criminalized for the places that they stay. This has turned from something that might criminalize wild swimmers into something that is a very pointed attack on a community, and it's judging them by their lifestyle and not by their acts. And actually, the Human Rights Commission are now looking into it, and they'll be releasing their report in March. The problem, of course, for people that don't belong to the traveling community is that there's also other sorts of trespass with intent to reside. There's protest camps. So if it wasn't for the anti-fracking protest camp up in Preston, we'd be ploughing along with basically, the highly environmentally toxic act of fracking. When this act comes in, the people that are protesting against the completely unnecessary destruction of ancient woodland, with the HS2 campaign, they would be criminalized instantly. So protest will be criminalized, but not only that, it's also like the Conservatives have remained very, very quiet on what happens about wild camping, because wild camping is, of course, trespass with intent to reside.
Of course.
So I think just to finish up, what they're trying to do is to say, don't worry, those of you that live in homes, this is an act meant to target a minority community that most of you know nothing about and have very little to do with. And they're expecting, and they're very dangerously close to being right, that in these kind of times, these tribal partisan times, that we're just going to sit back and allow them to restrict the human rights of a minority group. And so it's our job to persuade people that they will be affected directly by this in terms of protest, but also this is the start of a very slippery slope.
Yeah, I mean, that's I'm reminded of the they came for the activists. I was not one. They came, this is so important, isn't it, that you just actually can explain why something that's looking to target one specific group of people so evidently as this apparently is actually potentially going to have significant ramifications across society. And even bringing time back to now, we're looking at accessing nature during a pandemic, but wild camping, for example, something that more and more people are interested in, obviously, Nick. Could you give an example of how that could be actually made very problematic? And people are trying to access nature during the pandemic. People are trying to get out into the wild and into nature more and more. How difficult is that to actually do already, and how much more difficult could that become as a result of what's being proposed?
Well, so kind of the premise of the book that I wrote, the Book of Trespass, was here's me climbing all these fences and all these walls and swimming in all these rivers that in England the law actively discourages you to do. You are a trespasser, you are doing something wrong, and that's centuries of kind of sort of imposing that kind of belief in instilling it in our minds. Whereas in Scotland, the law of the land since 2003, the Land Reform Act, essentially actively encourages its public to connect with nature. You are allowed to forage, you're allowed to swim in all the waterways, you're allowed to walk in the woodlands, you're allowed to camp. And this is sort of similar to the Allemansrätten in Sweden, and the kind of the Finnish one that I can't pronounce because it's very difficult. But there are across Europe numerous examples of what is called a right to roam, a right to freely wander through nature under the parameters of a very strict set of responsibilities, which effectively put the ecology of the place that you're wandering through as paramount. That is the most important thing. So all the trespasses that I did in the Book of Trespass, would have been perfectly legitimate if were I just north of the border in Scotland. The issue here, like wild camping, is entirely banned, even on our right to roam land. Like if you were to go up at midnight to, as I do, to Hebden Bridge, to the Grouse-Moor up there, you're allowed to walk over it. So it's called open access land, but that's literally the limit of what you're allowed to do there. Were I to pitch a camp and, you know, set up a tent there, that would become illegal again. The only place you're allowed to do that is in Dartmoor. So how will the criminalization of trespass affect wild camping? Arguably, since we're not allowed to do it anyway, it's not going to. But the thing is, people do it because there is this thing, you can't stop us. People don't feel like they're doing something immoral by going to sleep to the sound of the owls and waking up to the dawn chorus. Like over in Scotland, up in Norway, Finland, Estonia, they're going to tell you that it's an essential part of being human, to be able to understand that these kind of quotidian miracles happen all the time. It's something akin to sublime. And actually, to the places that have encouraged it for many centuries, what this has done is encourage not just a care or a connection, but like a deep love for the environment around people. And is it any wonder that issues such as climate change or the destruction of the environment or species and habitat loss are kind of distant, abstract concerns for the people of England? It's very hard to actually get an understanding of what you know, species decline means, because we just haven't had the experience of the hedgerows, unless of course you're very lucky and you live in a place where the local landowner is lenient towards access, or you know, if you just live in a place that is so embedded in countryside that you do actually hear the birdsong.
So we'll come back to that. I think it's a really interesting idea, Nick, the idea that if you're given essentially kind of skin in the game, that you're going to care more, and if you're the more access you get, the more knowledge you're able to generate, the more respect that you're going to actually give to the natural environment. But I also want to pick up on a point you just said, which is actually around the kind of how you feel when you wild camp, or how you feel when you are going into the countryside and trying to access nature, and maybe looking at an ordnance survey map and reading that you can go there or you can't go there, or you can go here. Two questions. One, I do feel like I'm committing some sort of immoral act when I'm doing something like that. Part of me feels that, but the other part of me feels I shouldn't have that emotion. So one question, why do I feel like that? What is it that has made me feel in some way subservient in a space which is just essentially nature, the environment, space, land on the ground, woodland, the small areas of woodland that we are able to actually access? And second, so first of all, why do I feel like that? And why do I, no doubt lots of our viewers feel like that when they enter areas of natural beauty? And also, secondly to that, can you give us a little bit of an idea of this right to roam, which was introduced in England in 2003? What does that really mean?
Scotland.
In Scotland, of course, sorry. But so for England, though, we were given more access around that time as well. But what does that access, how limited is that access as well?
Yeah, so I go into great detail in the book about this kind of fascinating blurring between the real and the moral when it comes to trespass. To trespass is also in the Lord's Prayer. There is, the word trespass carries this kind of 4th century stone chapel candle smoke kind of air of transgression, and the devil will take you kind of thing. And it does feel like you have to climb over a fence, or you have to scrabble under a hedge. It feels like you're doing something wrong. And certainly the way the gamekeepers come at you, as if you've just devastated their their herd of Aberdeen Angus. You've just laid them all to the ground. And it was interesting to me, this idea of a vagrant is someone that strays off the line, but it's also used just as regularly as a moral vagrant, someone that can't be trusted, someone that is a pervert to the right orthodox line that we're all supposed to go on. There's many ways that this has been embedded within our sort of psyche, but number one, I think, is the fact that the law itself doesn't make the very clear and very tangible differentiation between walking in, say, a 2,000-acre deciduous woodland and hopping over someone's fence in a suburban garden and just interrupting their barbecue. The law of tort, which is under which trespass resides, essentially defines crossing the line, no matter where the line is or what the context or the scale of the acreage or what that land is dedicated to. It defines it as, under tort, as a damage to the owner of the land. And the owner of the land is allowed to seek financial reparation for the damage that you've caused. But it used to be, if you damaged the land, now just the simple step over the line is considered the damage. The problem, like I said, is that actually that's fair enough when it comes to private households, gardens, that kind of thing. And every single right to roam legislation across Europe, number one, as part of your responsibilities, protects the human right to private sanctity. In Sweden, you're not allowed to camp within 70 meters of the back garden fence of anyone's property. Everyone understands that we as humans have a right to privacy. But when that law extends over 20,000 acres of grouse moor, or 6,000 acres of parkland and woodland, as it does in the Duke of Buccleuch up in Nottingham, and that's just a fraction of the land that he does own, there has to be some sense of scale when the public need, which has just been proven by science for mental and for physical health, to connect with nature. In that context, and if you look around, and we're basically we are allowed along rights of way, and either side us are these private empires of nature that we're not allowed any access to. And it becomes even more absurd when we're talking about rivers. The fact that I'm not allowed to kayak, causing no damage whatsoever, floating above the land that belongs to the landowner. The water itself is nominally declared to be owned by the crown, though what that means, God only knows. Well, these things are all actually legal fictions. They're just created to polyfill the gaps of logic in property law.
So you're telling me that Finland and Sweden don't have an epidemic of crime, of people burgling people's back gardens, ramblers walking around who are then jumping into people's back gardens and nicking their barbecues, Nick?
I'm afraid I am telling you that it's not considered okay to camp in someone's back garden in Sweden. And, the moment the book was released, Twitter was full of people, and they always sort of say it as if it's the kind of mic drop moment, Obama just leaving the presidency. Well, if you want the right to roam, you won't mind me coming along and camping in your back garden. And it's not a mic drop moment. It's a really deeply kind of dangerous and divisive view, because it's been so internalized. These people are often, it's not the landowner that's getting in touch with me. It's people that are kind of wedded to the orthodoxy that it should be allowed to own something in such a way that everyone else can have none of its benefits. In England, the ownership of land allows you not only to just sort of do what you like with it to the extent that you're legally allowed to destroy it, it also defines your ownership as exclusive.
Mm-hmm.
And in Scotland, the right of the public to responsibly access nature since 2003 has overridden this kind of misanthropic, quite sort of Gollum-esque urge that something is only yours if no one else has any share of it. So in Scotland, in Sweden, there's still counts and there's still barons, and you know, they still own the land and they still tap the profit that is, you know, created on the land goes directly to their pocket. However, their right to exclude the hundreds of thousands of people, you know, that live on the perimeter of all of these different properties is just overridden by an old common standard that the public have a right, and also, you know, a desperate kind of medical need to access these natural spaces.
I was very taken in the book, this idea, this sort of construct that's come about where people, landowners essentially in England seem to have this idea that people only want access if they want to take, if they want to steal, or if they, you know, there's something that they want to almost predate from that land rather than just literally enjoy it for what it is. So I also really want to talk to you about the health element of things, Nick, and I think that's obviously something that we're Planted believe very passionately in, about the concept or the idea that by accessing nature, we're going to improve, enabling nature, access to nature, we're going to improve people's health, or people feel more productive, more creative. Their mental health outcomes are better when they feel connected with nature, and that's indeed part of the principles of biophilic design upon which we're building the event around, and the whole business around, no less. But let's perhaps, if we could, just focus a bit more on the numbers here, like in terms of our access to Rome in England specifically. Can you talk a little bit about what that means in terms of numbers, percentages? How much of our land can we, if we want to pick up mention the Ordnance Survey book earlier on, but if we want to pick up a map and wander around our environment, where can we and can't we go?
Well, on the OS map, there will be, unless you live in the areas very well catered for open access land, which is kind of like, you know, around Derby, around where else, sort of the Peak District kind of thing. You can see on OS maps these tiny little dots of yellow, which designate open access land. There's even such things as open access islands, where the land itself has been dedicated for you to go and roam. You're allowed to walk where you like on it. However, there's no right of way or open access that links you to these lands. So the best you can do is take out your binoculars and look at the land that you would be legally allowed to walk, though you would have to break the law to get there. So
unless you had a helicopter, obviously.
Well, actually, you'd still be trespassing the airspace. So, you know, the property law has got that covered. Don't worry about that. Wow. So because of the Countryside and Rights of Way Act, which came in the year 2000, it was the 20th anniversary just last November, that opened up 8% of England to open access. It also, however, was the cause, it set a limit for the ability of people, just everyday people, to register rights of way. So the Ramblers at the moment, probably the last decade, I think, have been working on registering as many rights of way to make them official, so that they're not lost by the cutoff date in 2026. So that's what we've got, completely aside from the Countryside and Rights of Way Act, because water access was just thrown off the table. And I only vaguely know why, but there was a certain amount of politicking going on to make that happen. You know, the kayakers and the paddleboarders and the wild swimmers were kind of left high and dry. for the year 2000. But that's why we want to see them number one on the priority. We want our rivers, we want our reservoirs opened up to public access, because blue space, as it's called, is just so deeply essential to mental health and physical health. And cold water swimming, wild swimming, is becoming a real movement in England. And yet it's only 3% of the waterways or the rivers in England that we're allowed access to. And I was chatting to a Sheffield swimming group last night doing a podcast, and the guy, Owen, had made a map of something like 250 reservoirs around the kind of Derbyshire area that 5 million people don't have access to.
Wow.
And, you know, once again, lockdown has just proven to us that just how viscerally we need a connection with nature. And in terms of health, you know, the parallels between this COVID pandemic and the Second World War, certainly in England, have, you know, Boris has been trumpeting that. And there are parallels. This is a sort of something that we all have to sort of brace ourselves for, and all have to sort of act in a communal way to improve the situation. But at the end of the Second World War, of course, the Attlee government sort of provided a kind of a welfare suite for this new nation, this new world that we were entering into. That's when the NHS was created. That's when state pensions were created. Part of the initial offer was the right to roam across all of England. The issue was that obviously the House of or the House of Lords was dominated to a member by landowners, and this was considered a step too far. So they created, instead of acknowledging right to roam, they created 10 national parks, which Boris is just extending. In the 70s, they were very blunt about the what they called these honeypots. The idea being that if you designate certain areas and you put in a load of picnic spots and benches, and you know, chuck an ice cream van in there, and you put a couple of sort of bins that are never big enough so that you can take pictures of the bins overspilling and prove how inherently you know, inherent vandals that the publics are. The aim is to funnel people from all of the places that are local to them and around them, so that that land remains intact without people's presence. But the real learning from the Second World War is that they saw the right to roam as the sister of the National Health Service. They said, give people the autonomous right to take their own exercise. If you like climbing, if you like swimming, if you like walking, do it. Do it responsibly, but maintain your own public health. And then they saw the NHS as the kind of the net that would catch you if you fell, and the two were intertwined. All we've got at the moment is an emergency service that is free at the point of care, but nothing to stop us getting there. And so obesity is a rising problem, is a real problem. Heart disease, but also anxiety, stress, depression, all of these things that can be alleviated with just constant, regular access to nature.
And indeed, toxic air, no less. And perhaps never have we've realised how important air quality is at this point in time, and how we've all craved good quality air. And those of us who are fortunate enough to be able to access some green spaces, I certainly always cherish and know the air quality is so much better outside of built-up city environments. Nick, I mean, is that really the central thrust of what you're saying as well? And perhaps the most important thing here is that this is about public health as much as anything, mental and physical health. This is about enabling our society and communities to access space in a way that perhaps we've become conditioned not to previously, to just tolerate a lack of access to space.
Absolutely. I mean, the book goes into the kind of the historic arguments for it. The book describes in great detail the history of enclosure and how once common land that we, you know, not only got the health benefits for, but also the wealth and the ability to make decisions over communally over how land was used. All of that was privatized by the barbed wire fence or the parkland wall. All the profit goes back into you know, the person that was able to privatize it. But actually now, in terms of the campaign, which is all I really care about, it's great that the book's doing well and people are interested in it. But for the campaign, we just knew early on that to take that kind of give us our land back, which is historically accurate, would actually just be presented as a far too partisan kind of approach. And what we want to do, you know, the Conservative Party call themselves the party of the NHS. I would call that socialism's victory, to be honest. Like it's become so embedded in the heart of England now, that the Conservatives like to pretend that they're the ones that care for it, whereas of course they're chopping it to bits with privatization. I would like to present the argument of our right to nature as something that is actually a deep, desperate need for our connection to nature, that has got nothing to do with blue or red rosettes, has just got to do with humanity and public health. Not to mention Boris's favorite phrase, which is alleviate the pressure on the NHS. Like they're even giving out green prescriptions now. Like you know, they're trialing GPs to actually just say go for a walk. Well, can we not go one step further and just give the people the right to go for a walk, or not chuck them off the land if they're doing nothing? You know, if they're doing something wrong, if they're littering, if they're vandalizing, then there are rules for that already. That's criminal.
And I guess also, Nick, a critical part of this as well is to work with landowners who are positive and who are not, you know, I mean, it would be wrong to characterize every landowner, and indeed you haven't done this, I would say, but, you know, just to emphasize that there are lots of landowners who are doing good practice, who are open to people coming respectfully onto their land and understanding, I guess, things like the countryside code and just being respectful. And there's so much evidence around us in our neighbouring countries around Europe, just Scotland, for example, if you step outside of England, as you've mentioned, but the Scandinavian countries as well, which you've touched upon, where nature is respected and loved, and people's land, or the land, is respected and loved. And I guess there's a big education piece to be done here as well, which clearly your campaign is doing, and you know, all power to you for doing what you are doing. But I mean, perhaps to end up, I mean, and I know you have touched on a couple of landowners, but where are the areas of good practice, the Peak District, where can people go if they feel restricted, they feel limited? And obviously we're talking about a time where COVID and the pandemic restrictions are necessarily limiting people's movement. But when things do open up and things return to normal, or whatever the next normal looks like, where would you say, you know, these are places you can go and already where landowners are welcoming and open to people accessing beautiful natural spaces?
Well, I'm going to be tricksy here, I think, I'm afraid. Like to name a couple of places, and there are undoubtedly landowners. I've got nothing against landowners. Like I try not to buy into this kind of binary opposition that just because gamekeepers shout at me does not mean that I have to feel aggressive towards them. I've got a huge amount of respect for the knowledge and the experience on the land that gamekeepers and landowners and land stewards and land workers have. But to name a couple of places, like just over the River Thames from where I was brought up, is it Hardwick House? I've forgotten now. It's where Hempen is. And the owner of that is reputedly, you know, he's been organic since 1970. All locals. I grew up like rambling and roaming his estate, you know, sort of catching sight of the tawny owls and the bluebells, and he's just very open and very he's a sort of progressive landowner. Same just up the canal from me at the moment is Whalley Weir, which is owned by Johnny Palmer, who recognizes, well, I'll say that later actually, he's growing fruit trees so that the people that he invites onto this weir, beautiful swimming spot, like stunning, are able to pick fruit when they're there, kind of thing. But the point is, Johnny Palmer seems to be, I haven't spoken to him yet, but we're practically neighbours, so I will go up and say hi at some point. Seems to be working on this idea that actually the public are not the threat to nature that the other landowners, sort of the orthodoxy seems to present us as. Actually, we, in many circumstances, we can be its very last line of defence. There's all manner of litter picking volunteer groups that are put up. There's all manner of sort of testing for microbeads in the rivers, testing for sewage and effluents. All of these are locally. I put the River Rodding Trust, which is a river in London, a sort of volunteer group set up by Paul Pousland of Lawyers for Nature, who are a wonderful organization that are campaigning for actual legal standing for both trees and rivers, to give rivers and trees essentially human rights that allows them to be treated much more than just objects that can be cut down for a cheap set of apartments or whatever. There are just countless examples of volunteers who have absolutely no rights in nature, that are taking the full scope of their responsibilities to nature and doing it in spite of having no rights to do it. So the River Rodding Trust will organise weekly litter picks and water sampling, which is invaluable to the scientists that are trying to promote much cleaner water on a nationwide level. But actually they have no right to be there. And I would say that to give people the right is the first step to engender in people the responsibility that they have towards nature.
Well, that's a lovely point to sort of bring things to a close, Nick. Other than to just ask you now, I mean, obviously, 25th of January is a big day. Obviously, I think it's very clear where your position is, and this idea that trespass could be turned into a criminal act for the first time in the UK's history. Is that fair to say?
Yes, except for the fact that the 25th was going to be when it was debated in Parliament.
Indeed.
That's now been postponed on account of COVID.
Okay.
So the saga continues, basically.
So I guess also that plays well for you in a way, because more opportunity to present your argument, but and to try and obviously convince people that this would be a terribly negative thing for people, not just of the traveller community, but more broadly, in time potentially for everyone who wants to access natural spaces in England and around the UK. What would you like people to do in the short term? Indeed, people who are interested in understanding this more, where can they go? What can they do to sort of demonstrate their support?
Yeah, thanks. First and foremost, please sign up to our website. On right at the bottom is the contact details at righttoroam.org.uk. And then secondarily, to write to your MP. It seems like a terribly old-fashioned thing to do, but it really does work. We have a template letter on our website that lots of people have been using, right up to today. But also, I think we're now realizing that like 1,000 letters that get dumped in a post bag in an office is actually slightly more carries more weight than 1,000 emails in an inbox. So write to your MP, because it really is a dynamic way to make that point clear. And yeah, but we would like, first and foremost, because we're a growing campaign, people to sign up, to stay in touch with us, and also to throw in their ideas, because at the moment it's just me and a few buddies, and we want a diverse, broad, north to south, east to west, kind of coalition of English people that just want greater access to nature.
Well, you've got one here, Nick. That's for absolutely certain. I've signed the petition, and I've planted support on this for sure. I think it's incredibly important, the work you're doing, and I think it's going to be more and more relevant to people in days and months to come. Indeed, certainly in the last few months, people have really understood how important it is to be able to access nature. And just like to reiterate my support for what you're doing, and our support indeed. And just thank you also for coming on board today. I think it's been fascinating talking to you, a really educational experience, and great fun as well. So thanks so much for your time, Nick. I really do appreciate it.
Thanks so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Our pleasure, our pleasure. So obviously, Book of Trespass from Nick Hayes. I'm 270 pages through at the moment. It's a fascinating read, and beautifully illustrated by Nick himself. I would say stunning cover, and I'm pleased to say, all being well, you'll be able to actually buy some of Nick's artwork on our website very soon, and we'll let you all know about that when that's possible to do. So just leaves it for me to say, if you've enjoyed today's episode of Planted Unearthed, please do subscribe to our YouTube channel, details of which can be found on our website, www.planted-cities.co.uk. On there, you'll find more fantastic interviews and editorial content from some of the leading thinkers in the world of design, sustainability, and nature. Please also watch out for our exciting news coming soon about our events program in 2021. And that just leaves it for me again to say thanks to the brilliant Nick Hayes. Thanks to our friends at Horticus for their wonderful modular planting system, which I'm sitting in front of today. To my old friend Tom Howe for producing the Planted Unearthed music. And most importantly, thanks to you for watching. My name's Sam Peters, and this has been Planted Unearthed.